welcome to Series 10, Episode 5 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Nikki Smith, and today my lovely co-host is Lesley Cara. Hello, Lesley.
Hello, Nikki. I'm glad to be back.
Indeed. So in our last episode, Alex North talked to us about his latest novel, The Half-Burnt House, and about writing festivals and why they're so important. In today's episode, we're going to be talking to CJ Cooke about her latest book, which is called A Haunting in the Arctic, which is very apt for this time of year. And the topic is putting Gothic in thrillers. But before we move on to all things creepy and chilling and scary, tell us what you've been up to this week, Lesley. I believe that you've been haunting Frinton-on-Sea again.
Yes, I have actually. Yes, they can't get rid of me. To be honest, I didn't think they'd ever let me back in, but no, I was. I mean, I haven't lived there for a few years now, but I'm still involved in the literary festival. I'm not on the committee anymore because that's too much work at the moment for me. But I usually host the Thursday evening crime and wine event, and this year it was Mick Herron, and that was a great honour for me because, you know, the fabulous Mick Herron. Talking about his Slough House series of thrillers, spy fiction thrillers, and they're more than spy fiction. They're funny, they're political satire, they're hilarious as well. So
they're fantastic, aren't they? Yeah,
they are. I really enjoyed it. And of course, because I've had to do the research and preparation, I've really got into his books. I hadn't sort of read that many of them before, so that was really nice. And I've been watching with Rashid. We've been watching the Apple TV production Slow Horses, which is fantastic. I mean, it's all fantastic, but the first episode of series 1, the amazing beginning, it's adrenaline filled beginning. It's fantastic and fabulously played by Gary Oldman. He's just repellently awful but wonderful.
He is. He's got him. He's absolutely brilliant, isn't he? Yeah, really good.
Yeah. Really good. And it was a sellout event, so that was lovely. It was so nice to be back out doing events because I felt so ill. I still don't feel 100%, to be honest. This flu bug really knocked me for 6. It's horrible. So it was nice to be sort of out and about again and doing something a little bit different. And then was meant to be doing an event this Thursday as well in Faversham, but apparently we've got some storm heading our way, Storm Kieran.
Yes.
So they've decided that because lots of villages around, you know, it might be flooding or what have you, they're not taking any chances. So that's been reorganised now to the 28th of November, an event with Holly Seddon and Laura Marshall and Nicole Kennedy. So I'm a little upset it's not happening this week, but it is still happening. So hopefully that will all go ahead at the end of the month. But what about you, Nikki? What have you been up to? Because we haven't really spoken for a while, have we?
No, we haven't. Well, I've just been busy trying to write the beginning of my next book. So the one that will be hopefully out in 2025. And I've also been doing page proofs for the guests, which will be out next year. So it's the kind of the last little bit, if you like, I think, in the kind of writing process. But it's the one where you have to read the whole book to yourself. Well, you don't have to, but that's how I do it. Read it to myself out loud, which I think you pick up more mistakes that way when it forces you to kind of slow down and actually, you know, really, really look at it. So yes, so that's been fun. But when it's your own book and you really do know it inside out and you've read it about 72,000 times before, it's not the most exciting job in the world, but well worth it. So yes, I think that it's just catching all those last little errors, which obviously the proofs will, I presume, they come out and they will still have the errors, but they'll be corrected for the kind of final version of the book, which will be out next year. So exciting. I'm really excited to see it on the shelves. So yeah, can't wait.
Fantastic. Yeah, and when's yours coming? Next one, is it June or July next year?
It's June, I think. Yeah, well, at the moment, sometimes it seems to change, I think, last minute, but yeah, I think it's June next year. So yes.
And it's called The Guests, isn't it?
Yes,
Is it called The Guests?
indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Fantastic.
yes, it'll be
Yeah. Oh,
yes, it's another destination thriller set in the Maldives this time. So hopefully I should have a cover reveal in the next couple of weeks. So that will be very exciting indeed. Yes.
yes, talking of cover, I think my cover reveal is going to be this Thursday, so that will be exciting.
Well, I may have had a sneak peek, and I may think it's brilliant. So yes, can't wait to see that. Yes, but I think now it's probably time that we need to get CJ Cooke on and start talking about putting the Gothic in thrillers. Welcome, CJ Cooke, or Carolyn, if we can call you that, to In Suspense. We're absolutely delighted to be talking to you today at the time of recording, which is Halloween. So it's a very fitting opportunity to be discussing Gothic thrillers with you. And we wondered if you could just introduce yourself and your books to our listeners, please. And we always remind our guests that this is no time for modesty. So tell us everything. Yes.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes, hi. My name is CJ Cooke, or Carolyn, if you know me. And I have been writing since the age of 7. I started writing when I found an old diary in my home in Belfast, Northern Ireland, which is where I was born. I have published about 15 books of various genres. I started as a poet. I'm also an academic, so I've published some academic books. But I turned to novels in 2009 after the birth of my second child, and yeah, since then I've gone on to write. Well, it's not a series, but I think thrillers, which is where I feel most at home, I think. So the most recent is A Haunting in the Arctic, and currently last year's novel, The Ghost Woods, is the Scottish Book of the Month for Waterstones, which is really great.
That's amazing. And I think you've left just a few things out. I think a lot of your books, or some of your books anyway, have been adapted for TV, or they're in the process of being adapted for TV.
Yeah, so The Lighthouse Witches, which was my 2021 novel, which explores the Scottish witch hunts, and it has been optioned for a TV series by Studio Canal, which is really great news. So we have a showrunner attached, and I'm hoping that now that the strike seems to be coming to an end in Los Angeles, we'll move forward with that. I also finished a couple of months ago a script for one of my early novels. It was my second novel, called The Boy Who Could See Demons, and being made into a film, which is phenomenal.
Fantastic. Oh, massive congratulations on that. And thank you for telling our listeners a bit about you. And would you like to tell us something about your latest novel, which is called A Haunting in the Arctic, which both Lesley and I thought was brilliantly written and deeply chilling?
So A Haunting in the Arctic it has 2 timelines. One timeline is it's in 1901, and we are in Dundee. The whaling ship called the Orman is for the Arctic, but it has an extra crew member on board in the form of a woman who shouldn't be there. And the 2023 narrative takes place in a very remote corner of Iceland, where the shipwreck of the Orman has come to rest, and a group of urban explorers have come to explore the ship, and it's meant to be haunted, and we follow their journey as they uncover the secrets of the past.
Well, if that doesn't whet our listeners' appetite, I don't know what will. It's really, really spooky and chilling and very sad. Brilliantly written. As you said, it's timelines in it, 1901 and the current day.
Yeah.
And we're following the shocking and brutal ordeal of Nikki in the previous timeline, and the Dominique, who's the urban explorer, isn't she, in the current timeline. And I was just wondering, what came first? Which of those voices and stories came first, or did they come together?
It's hard to say without giving away the plot. But I think I very much started with the shipwreck. So that would be Dominique's voice, because she explores that goes to explore the wreck. And I suppose I was thinking about abandoned structures and the stories that they contain. And I was thinking about, you know, as a young child, I used to spend a lot of time in this old derelict. It was this huge house around the corner from us. And it was just interesting how, you know, that seemed like another realm. And I think that's very much what the Gothic is about liminality, a sort of space between two worlds or two realms. And I wonder if that's why the haunted house is such a trope in the Gothic, because it's this space that is other.
Yeah, we're going to come on and talk about the Gothic in a minute, but can you tell us a little bit more about those two female characters? Give us a flavour of their personalities, perhaps, without spoilers.
So, Dominique is a young urban explorer, and she is visiting. She has adopted the lifestyle that comes with urban exploring, which is very much what that community is about. And we know that she's broken. We know that she's dealing with some real demons. And the landscape in Iceland is very much a reflection of her inner world. And Nikki is, in the 1901 narrative, she is married. She's quite privileged because her father owned a whaling company, but her husband has been sent off to war, or has gone off to fight against, it was the Boer War, and she's waiting for him to come home when an event sees her end up on her father's ship, the Orman. So yeah, that's the two main characters that both their voices were very much in my head when I was writing.
And some early readers are saying that this is one of your darkest books so far. Do you think that they're right?
Yeah, I would say that it is. I actually hesitated writing this book because of when the story came to me, I did pause and think, that's quite brutal. But I was thinking a lot about the folktales that I'd come across and how they dealt with sexual violence against women, such as the original Selkie wife tale. So there's a folktale in the book about the Selkie wife, and this is based on the folktale of a Selkie woman who is a Selkie creature in Scotland, and I think in the Northern Isles, is a creature that exists as a seal in the ocean, can come on land, take off its what's known as sea clothes or its seal skin, and become human. And the tale follows a Selkie woman who comes on shore, and she's a human there, but her sea clothing is stolen by a man who says, I want you to come be my wife. And so he robs her of her identity, makes her marry him, makes her stay where she doesn't want to be, and bear his children, until one day one of her children finds the seal skin and hands it back, and she goes back to the sea. And it's a really troubling story, really, really uncomfortable folktale. But I thought, there's a lot of folktales in which violence against women is very normalized and rendered comfortable. And I think that's continued to a large extent, that violence against women is something we come to expect. So when I thought about this story, and I was also thinking about some of the folktales around bodies on ships that are seen as a curse. And I was thinking very much, I was still in the Ghostwoods frame of mind, because with the Ghostwoods, I was thinking a lot about the policing of women's bodies. So with this story, I could have made a decision not to write it, but I really wanted to lean into that discomfort. I feel that literature has a duty to make us uncomfortable sometimes and to confront the things that we maybe have normalized or maybe glossed over, such as the folk tales. And it's also witness. I think it's the job of literature to bear witness as well to trauma. So this story does feature trauma, and I think it is quite upfront about that, but I don't think it's a dark ending. At least in my view, I was very much about not making everything okay and tying everything up. But in my view, the ending offers a chink of light, which is sometimes all you need.
Yes, yes. I like it when endings aren't necessarily tied up neatly as well. I like it that the reader has kind of something to think about. And do you scare yourself sometimes when you're writing your books?
Yes, I do. And I think that's good. It usually means I've done something right, that maybe that will translate to the reader, that it will be fresh for them too. It's nice to have a visceral reaction when you're writing, especially when you've sort of planned something and then maybe either the nature of the scene or the plot goes in a way that provokes a genuine response. I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, no, yes, I agree. And why do you think that so many of us seem to love reading books or watching films that scare the living daylights out of us?
So there's a lot of psychology around this, isn't there? I think we all know that fear is a big part of life, but by choosing to enter a story that is scary, we're giving agency to the experience of being afraid, which is not something we tend to experience in real life. So fear can ambush us, and I think that can often lead to being afraid of fear, in that double paradox. But reading scary stories can give us a chance to lean into that controlled way and maybe teach us how to deal with fear in real life. So I think that's probably the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer, and you're right. There is a lot of psychology around that, isn't there? And why we like to. It's like we want to sort of have our fear in a vicarious way, but we can control it, can't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. Your last 4 books, including this one. And by the way, if you can hear a noise, that's for some reason they've decided to go on outside. It always happens whenever we're recording anything, something work is going on. But anyway, hope you can't hear it. If you can, apologies. Okay. So your last 4 books, including this one, A Haunting in the Arctic, are classed as Gothic thrillers, aren't they? That's how they're marketed. And I wondered, you sort of started to touch on that a little bit earlier, but I wondered if you could try to define the Gothic genre for us, because there seems to be a fair bit of overlap between Gothic and horror and ghost stories and stories involving folklore and tradition and historical traditions. So it's all a little bit murky. I was wondering whether you could throw some light on what you think constitutes the Gothic genre.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of scholarship around the Gothic. And I think the best way that I can describe it is in terms of Mary Shelley. And so the Gothic seems to have roots in political upheaval and a kind of it's tethered to society, to commentary on things that are going on. But I think what Mary Shelley did was she brought in science fiction, the fear of the unknown, quite a lot of psychology pre-Freud. So the uncanny, I think, is a massive part of what distinguishes the Gothic from horror. And you can see that the uncanny is horrifying, that sense of something that is strange. But the horror isn't, I think horror isn't really interested in what's strange. It's just, it's again, that overlap.
Shock. Yeah.
Gothic is really invested in and weirdness and the inexplicable. And I think it's for me really invested in liminality and the margins between this world and the next, hence the supernatural. But yeah, it's for me, it's about the goo that resides underneath the carapace. It's what you see when you lift up the carpet, and that can be social affairs. It can be gender and sexual politics. It's a very interesting genre, I think, and it's why I think I've always leaned towards it. Yeah, but sometimes the supernatural will end up being pegged as fantasy, or the horror elements are more horror. But I think Gothic's having a moment.
It is. I was just
Well, I
thinking
do.
that. I was
Yeah.
thinking what you were saying earlier about political instability and things like that, because we're going through all that now, aren't we? And all the things about sort of misogyny and AI and all these sort of new technologies. It is kind of ripe for a Gothic revival, isn't it, almost?
Yeah, I think we're going through such weird times right now as a world that, you know, even with and all of that, it's very difficult to process. But I look at even what's sort of trending on Netflix and Stranger Things and shows like that, which are probably, I would say, more horror, but still I think we are mainstreaming what used to be quite niche, because we're all experiencing very weird things and are interested in reading about that. And maybe it does link back to wanting to read scary stories to control our fears.
And have you always been drawn to the Gothic genre, or did it sort of develop as a result of you learning more about it, or, you know, as a child were you drawn to it?
I think I've always written very dark things. I started writing unwittingly to process trauma. So I grew up in a very, very abusive household during the Troubles. So both outside and in my home were very scary places, and writing was a respite from that. And it wasn't just journaling. I wrote creatively, but I was putting stuff on the page, I think, as a way of feelings, always very dark. But in terms of writing Gothic works, I think I was really encouraged by my publisher. So I had stripped out a lot of folklore from my novel The Nesting, because I worried that they would sort of think, oh no, you know, we don't want it to be sort of too Gothic. But they were really into it, and they were like, no, we want more of that. And I was like, oh, okay, I can bring that all day long. So it's really good. And even with the Lighthouse Witches, I actually was really, really hesitant in telling my publisher that you know, the new book had witches in it. So it wasn't originally titled The Lighthouse Witches, but I was writing the story conscious that there's going to be witches in it. And I just was so scared that they were going to be like, you're writing what now? Because this was before the big resurgence of literature. You know, it was before all of that I was writing this book. So I didn't know that it was going to become trendy. I just saw my publisher saying, oh, for God's sake, you know, it's no, you can't have witches, that's too sci-fi, or not sci, you know, like fantasy. So I really did hold off telling them until quite late, and luckily they were on board. But I think, I think my natural inclination has been towards the Gothic, but it has taken a bit of courage to lean into it.
Fantastic. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about setting now. And I read that you actually went to Iceland for this.
I did.
Managed to do some research.
Yeah. So I had previously been to Iceland very, very briefly, just for a few days to teach at the university. I'm an academic, so I teach creative writing at the University of Glasgow, and I had been invited by a colleague at the University of Iceland to teach there. And I loved it. And some of the stuff I came across there made its way into the Lighthouse Witches. It inspired the grimoire. And I'm just fascinated by the country of Iceland as well. So I'd only spent a few days in Reykjavik, and I had in my mind this particular corner I knew the sort of remote location that I wanted for the setting in A Haunting in the Arctic. And I actually found out that there is a shipwreck grounded in the West Fjords of Iceland. So I thought, I have to go and see this. And I was very lucky. I got a bit of Creative Scotland funding to travel. We drove, I say we because I made my husband come. I was a bit, yeah, I was like, I have no problem traveling alone, but this was going to be a bit of a road trip. And I thought, if I get stuck, or Iceland's weather is famously treacherous, you know, even in summer, it can be, and we experienced that, it can be really quite changeable. And we got a 4x4. We didn't, you know, mess around with just a little dinky car. And that was lucky because the roads were fierce. I mean, they were just gravel, they weren't roads. But anyway, yeah, so I got to see the shipwreck. That really helped just concretize the Ormen in my head. It helped me really, you know, every time I would go back and write about it then, I could just see it, because I think there's a huge amount of logistics. You want to make sure you're getting your facts straight. And that was just really helpful, but it was so inspiring. And the landscape as well was just absolutely phenomenal.
Fantastic. You're fantastic. Yes. I mean, you definitely get the impression from reading the book, you know, that you kind of, you've been there. It makes you do, you know, you feel that you're there. It's fantastic. Made me feel cold a lot of the time, actually, which I think is what a lot of people have said. And looking at your previous books, the Lighthouse Witches was set on a remote Scottish island, and the Ghost Woods was set in the ancient woodland on the Scottish borders. And obviously the Nesting was set in Norway. This one's set in Iceland, just off the coast of Iceland. What is it, do you think, about these locations that make them work so well for Gothic thrillers?
I think the setting of a Gothic book, a Gothic story, the setting is really important. I think it has to have all that mist and darkness and eeriness that you know, that really creates the mood or the tone. You know, there's no point in setting it on a beach, really. I think that would be an interesting exercise, but it's not going to carry the same flavor. So yeah, I remember with the Nesting, I was really, really certain that it had to be set in Norway, because I wanted a gorgeous but hostile place for this setting. And I'd never been to Norway, but I ended up, it was right. It was perfect. With Scotland, because I moved to Scotland 4 years ago, it'll be 4 years next month. I've taught at the University of Glasgow for 9 years, but I was commuting for a long time, and then we moved. And actually, I did a DNA test, and it turns out I'm 75% Scottish. So that was weird. I know it contradicts my family tree. So this is the interesting thing. My family tree is all Irish, so who knows?
Wow.
But I know. So I think just coming here and I suppose really learning about the witch trials, because we live quite close to some major sites and that history. And I'd done so much thinking around that for the Lighthouse Witches, that's just continued, I think, with the Ghost Woods, with a Haunting in the Arctic as well. I just, yeah, these settings, and but also logistically, because Dundee was a major place for whale ships. It was like the biggest port after Hull, and I know nothing of Hull, but I do know about Scotland and Dundee. It felt a bit closer to be able to research. So yeah.
Do you think that you could ever set a Gothic thriller somewhere hot, or maybe, like, I don't know, like some kind of alien landscape type thing? Or do you think it's got to be that kind of, you know, cold and or bleak kind of landscape?
I think it has to be cold and bleak for me. I think, you know, you've got Southern Gothic, which is, it's, you know, it's hot and everything, hot and humid, and has all those kind of traditions, cultural traditions and so on. But I also I think it's not just the temperature or the mood of the landscape. I think it's very much about tradition and about there's just this, you know, rich seam of folkloric tradition and cultural tradition. And like Samhain in Scotland it's just filled with you know, these very Scottish specific traditions and literature as well. So I think I'm using setting in that kind of intertextual way. I mean, even Edgar Allan Poe has ties to Scotland as well. He went to school in Irvine, which is like 20 minutes from me. So yeah, and there's apparently a graveyard with lots of his family members, lots of Poes, which I haven't been to. But I know this because one of our PhD students at the university was doing his PhD on Edgar Allan Poe, and he was American. So I was like, why are you in Scotland? And he said, oh, because of the Scottish connection. And I was like, wait, what? So I think I think there's more to it, isn't there, than just the kind of flavor of the location. It's about all of those traditions as well.
Yeah.
And I believe you spent a couple of weeks actually on a ship in Norway when you were in the nesting.
Yes.
Own, didn't you? So can you tell us how you came to be? I mean, that must have been an incredible experience. So can you
it
tell
really
us
was. Yeah.
how you came to be on that ship, and also whether that experience fed into the nesting and this latest one, which also takes place a lot on the ship.
No, it really, really did. I knew I wanted to go to Norway to explore, to write the nesting, to think about, the landscape, and to immerse myself in Norwegian culture. But Norway, it best accessed by a ship. It's really expensive, I think, I was told by someone whose husband is Norwegian, it's very expensive to hire a car, and it's just better because it's the way the land is, it's better to travel by boat. And that was exactly right. I hadn't thought of that, of a boat. My sort of default was just to rent a car and go and see parts of it. But yeah, so there was a ship that went from Bergen to Kirkenes, which is on the Russian border, and back down. And so I booked that and went away for the longest time I've ever been away from my kids, which was 2 weeks. The boat was 12 days, but I was away for 2 weeks. It was really my husband saying, no, just go and do it. It's just before Christmas. It's, everything has kind of quietened down. Just go do this. And so I did, and it was really transformative, actually, in a number of ways. I think it was transformative to just have that time to, with just my book. No, I cleared my desk with my day job before I went. Obviously my husband was looking after the kids, and it was just me and my story for that period. And that time was it was so brilliant. It really helped me dive deep into all of those structural issues, and I feel that has kind of upskilled me, if you like, for the other books. So it did impact the rest of my writing, but also just give me sort of time and headspace to really think about the culture of Norway, to experience that darkness, because it was only light for 2 hours a day, but it wasn't even like, it wasn't daylight. It was just dusk for 2 hours a day. And then the sun, like at lunchtime from 12 until 2, you would get like a really, really weak light, and then it would just be black. And, I think you have to experience that to write it. It's even the effect in your body. It was I was just so tired all the time. But it gave me a lot of respect for people who live there, especially in the tiny, tiny little fishing villages with like 60 people. I was just amazed. It was like a different planet, but they were wonderful. There was an art gallery in this Arctic fishing village right at the top of Norway. I just thought, this is incredible. They're not surviving, they're thriving here. So they were really resilient, really coped with it brilliantly. So
yeah, that's fascinating. How much time would you say that you spend researching your novels before you put your fingers on the keyboard? Is it something that you do first, or is it a kind of ongoing process as you're writing?
Yeah, it's sort of ongoing. I think times difficult to know how much to research of a particular element, and once you get the story going, then you can sort of pause and research that particular element. I find research a double-edged sword. I love doing the research, and I always get really pulled in and hyper fixated on different elements. So I have to sort of just force myself to stop researching. But it can be over, and I sort of have this period of hating myself when I'm writing, because I always swear, no, next book I'm going to simplify, and I'm going to write what I know, and I'm not going to, put together a synopsis for something that's going to involve tons of research. And then I just invariably do. So with this book, I find this really hard to write because, it was one thing having been on a ship, a nice, ship. It wasn't exactly a cruise ship, but it was classed as a ferry, but it wasn't like the ferry from Stranraer. That's one thing. But to write as though you know what it's like to be on a whaling ship in 1901, oh my God, it involves so much research. And I was at once fascinated, but as I said, it was a lot. And it took a long time for me to feel comfortable writing about that. So yeah, it's there's a lot of research in my books, but as I said, I always, like, I got really, really obsessed with fungi when I was writing the Ghostwoods. And then at the minute I'm writing a book set in Orkney, and I've just been obsessed with Orkney. I thought I would just, because it's based on the Orkney witch trials, and I thought I would just focus on that, but no, I've really been pulling apart the whole history of Orkney and in the 1500s, and really getting quite caught up on that. So, but I think you've got to trust the process, because actually, the political situation in Orkney, this particular witch trial that I'm writing about in the new book, it was not a normal witch trial. It was very much tied to Orkney's political situation. So I'm kind of grateful that I've done that extra research, because it has unearthed quite a bit about this witch trial that I had taken it, that this was not that there's a standard witch trial, but I'd sort of taken it that she was accused and but no, she was being used as a political pawn. And so sometimes you've got to suspect that there's reasons why you that you do the things that you do, and the process will show up for you. So
it sounds like no research is wasted, really, because if you don't use it in the book you're researching for, you'll retain those nuggets and possibly use them in books to come. So, but Carolyn, we've been talking recently on this podcast about the supposed waning in popularity of the psychological thriller because of the sheer number of them out there. And those of us who write that particular genre are having to come up with ever more hooky hooks and possibly trying them or incorporating other genre elements like the supernatural, perhaps, or the Gothic, in order to make them stand out in a saturated market. And I know you teach creative writing as well. So what's your take on that, on the sort of evolution of the psychological thriller? Because you have elements of that in your work as well, don't you?
Yeah. I've written a couple of novels that were sort of technically psychological thriller before I wrote The Nesting, and that was definitely not just, it was psychological, obviously much more Gothic. And I think that genre in general tends to there's a natural evolution, and it might be to do with market saturation, or it might be to do with the sort of zeitgeist and what people are in the mood to read. So I think the domestic thriller and the psychological thriller, still have a lot of currency. And I think they're still really, really interesting kind of genres to read. But maybe the gender politics that have been played out in those has shifted different kind of themes that can be explored. So I think it's about, a writer is an observer. And it's about really, I think, observing what's going on in the world right now and trying to position your work in that regard. And I suppose, I suppose, it's about writing what interests you, or what you're excited to to write about, that always comes through. So when I started writing action, I didn't think about genre, and I was really naive. My first novel was positioned very much as fantasy, and I remember kind of being alarmed by that because I hadn't considered that I was writing fantasy, but I was thinking about craft. I was thinking about all those the character and dialogue and all those things that we really think about and that we teach when people are really developing their writing. But I think going back to that's important too, and just thinking about what you want to write rather than what genre it's going to be, because sometimes that is really at the behest of the publishers.
Advice, good advice.
Very true. You also teach creative writing, I think, don't you, at the University of Glasgow? Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you came to do that, and what benefits you draw from your teaching in terms of your own creative process? Because it's never a one-way street, is it?
Yeah. I started as an academic, but I was a film academic. So my PhD was actually literature and film. But I was a film lecturer for about 4 years, and then I was writing more and more poetry. I won a big prize, and I thought maybe I should see if I can teach creative writing instead of film, because I'm kind of doing two things here at the minute with a young family, and that's a bit and so I started teaching creative writing around as an academic subject, 2009. And I really have found that it's a two-way street. I really love teaching. We at the University of Glasgow in particular, we teach postgraduate students, and so we're often working with people who have built a career in law or finance, and they've taken a sort of 2-year sabbatical to really dedicate themselves to a project that they've been, writing for sometimes 10, 20 years. And that is a joy, I think, to be part of someone's process. There's a lot of crossover between the personal and the creative. So there's a lot of, their own, even if it's not a memoir, it's still their work, and they're still putting a lot of themselves in it and shaping that creatively. So, but yeah, I think it really does help to be working in an area where you're talking and thinking all day long about structure, about character, about form, and that really comes into my own work too. So that's helpful. I think it would be very detrimental to my writing if I was working full time in dentistry or something. I would be able to manage something so distinct. So yeah, my brain's always thinking about the creative process.
Fantastic. And I know you also organised the the online stay-at-home festival, didn't you, during the pandemic?
Yeah.
Now, is this something you'd ever consider doing again? Because although we don't all have to stay at home now, luckily we can go out and about. And we were talking in our last episode about the importance of festivals. But I know for a lot of people, for various maybe disability or mental health or financial constraints, a whole host of different things, they do find accessing festivals quite challenging. So I was wondering, would you ever consider doing something like that again?
I would, for sure. Yeah, I would love to. It is also a lot of work, as you can imagine.
I was going to say it must have been at the time, especially because nobody was used to kind of Zoom or anything. Goodness me, yeah, the organisation must have been quite phenomenal. Yeah,
it was a total brave new world, and Zoom bombing, which I think we all know what that is now, but that was a complete, shock to the system. So that was a whole new thing, but it was exciting. We cut new ground, I think. And it was great, and I still love Zoom, and I love what it can do, and I love that it's an inclusive space. Many years ago, I ran a project called Writing Motherhood, and it was about talking about motherhood and doing festival events. But we did have well-attended events, but I often felt like barrier for a lot of women was being able to attend in person for various reasons. But we did a virtual sort of motherhood thing, and that was phenomenal. There's women on camera with their babies on their knees, and that was just great. So it does make it a more inclusive space for literature, which is very much what I'm invested in. So I would never say never. I think when I've got a bit of a free chance, I think I would definitely do it again.
Doesn't sound like you have much free time. So.
No, I don't.
We'd like to ask you, is there anything that you've read recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I am currently reading The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon on Audible, and it's really great as far as spookiness goes. It's giving all those spooky vibes. But I'm also reading The Salt Path by Raynor Winn, which is just gorgeous. I mean, I've had that book for so long, and I've just recently unearthed it and thought, oh God, this is beautiful. And I've just finished The Marriage Portrait by Maggie, which left me in a major book hangover. It was so exquisite. I actually said to my husband, I might as well just quit. This book exists and it's the perfect book. So she's done it, and that's fine. Nobody else needs to write anymore because it's so brilliant. But obviously that's not true, but it's just, every word to me is perfect. And I also have been reading Medea by Rosie Hewlett, and that's a debut coming out next March, which I really recommend. I did classics at university and I did Latin at school, and Medea was always that story that's so transgressive, and it really clashes with, because it's about a mother who kills her children, and how on earth do you write that? So I've always thought I'd love to have a go at writing something like that. So I never have, and so this book has been brilliant, and she's done it justice. So it's terrific.
Fantastic. Good recommendations. Lesley, how about you? What have you been reading recently?
Well, I've been reading a lot of Mick Herron's because I was doing an event with him last week, interviewing him. So I've really sort of been steeped in that, really, and I've been reading lots of books from the Slough House series, and his most recent standalone thriller, The Secret Hours, which I can thoroughly recommend. It's really, really brilliant. Some of it's set it opens up in Devon with someone sort of being an intruder and somebody running for his life, and then who's obviously a former spy of some sort, and then it moves to London to this sort of monochrome inquiry, and then the third part takes place in Berlin, post reunification Berlin. It's a brilliant book, really enjoyed it. So that's really all I've been reading at the moment, and I've been rereading my own work because I've had all my proofs to do. Nikki and I were talking about that before you came on, Carolyn. How ghastly it is to have to read your own novel 150 times,
Yeah. I hear that. Or when they come back a few weeks later with author queries, and it's like, I can't remember what that bit is meant to be. No.
Yeah. But I have actually been listening also. I've been treating myself and listening on Audible to None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, because I hadn't got around to it, and I'm absolutely loving that. So
it's so good. It's so good. Really, I love that. Yeah.
What about you, Nikki? What are you reading?
I've been reading this proof, which is called The House on Rye Lane by Susan Allott, and she wrote The Silence. She was one of her debut 2020 people, actually, and it's brilliant, really good. I wouldn't say it's Gothic exactly, but it's a ghost story, and or very, very kind of haunting, and 3 timelines, brilliantly written, and packs a real emotional punch. I loved it. So
well, I used to live near a Rye Lane, but I bet it's not the Rye Lane in Peckham.
In Peckham, it is. Yes.
Oh, I was that. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, I know that area very well. Oh, yes. Hey, I need to read that.
And setting features heavily. So, yes, you will need to read it.
Oh, yes. Fantastic. Yes, I used to live in Nunhead. I know Rye Lane very well. Mind you, that was back in the 80s, a long while ago. Anyway, I'm afraid that's all all we've got time for now, Carolyn. That's really sad because we could go on
Been lovely.
talking for a long while. Thank you so much for agreeing to be today's guest. And we'd like to remind everybody that A Haunting in the Arctic is out now, isn't it? And be prepared to be scared, because it is scary, but it's well worth the read.
It is. Yes, congratulations on a fantastic book, Carolyn, and we wish you every success with it. So in our next episode, we are going to be picking Julie Cohen's brains on writing in 2 genres, so we can't wait for that. And of course, before that one airs, we're going to have another mini-sode with Agent's Assistant Alice Hoskins, and we'll be continuing on our theme of the author-agent relationship.
Yes, and in the meantime, do get in touch across any of our social media channels if you have any topics you'd like us to cover. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then please rate and review us on whatever platform you're listening on so that others discuss. But for now, it's goodbye from CJ Cooke.
Thank you very much for having me.
And it's goodbye from Nikki Smith. And it's goodbye from me. See you soon.
Bye.